All right, good morning, members and officers. I'd like to advise this meeting is going to be recorded, where it will be placed on the Council's website for repeated viewing. The Council's website will be updated with a hyperlink to the East Ayrshire Council YouTube channel, where the video will be hosted and the recording has now begun. Julie, could I call you in for the sediment, please?
Thanks, Provost, and good morning, members. Provost Claire Leach.
Here.
Councillor Stephen Canning.
Present, thanks.
Councillor Ellen Friel.
I'm here, thank you.
Councillor John McFadgen.
Present.
Deputy Provost John McGee.
Yep.
Councillor Caroline Barton.
Yeah.
Councillor Elaine Cowan.
Here.
Councillor David Richardson.
Present.
Councillor James Adams. Councillor Jane Sangster.
Here, thank you.
Councillor Ian Linton.
Here.
Councillor Douglas Reid.
Yep.
Councillor Graham Barton.
Here, thanks, Julie.
Councillor Graham Boyd.
Here, thanks, Julie.
I have an apology from Councillor Barry Douglas. Councillor Neil Ingram.
Here, thanks, Julie.
Councillor Peter Mayburn.
Present, good morning.
Councillor Claire Maitland.
Here.
Councillor Jim Todd.
Yep.
Councillor Beverly Clark.
Here.
Councillor Sally Cogley. Here. Councillor Kevin McGregor.
Here, thank you.
Councillor Linda Maben.
Here, thanks, Julie.
Councillor William Lennox.
Morning, here.
Councillor Alison Simmons.
Julie, she's running late, so
Thank you. Councillor Billy Crawford.
Yeah.
Councillor June Kyle.
Very present.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Angela, thanks.
Councillor Neil Watts.
present, Julie.
Councillor Drew Filson. Councillor Jennifer Hogg.
I'm here, thank you.
And Councillor James Kyle.
Here, thank you.
Thanks, members.
Thank you, Julie. Members, before we move on, I'd just like to take the opportunity to welcome a new Democratic Services Officer, Lynn Pearson, who's sitting at the back. Very well and welcome to you, Lynn. Lynn's just moved here from North Ayrshire, so great to have you, Lynn. So move on to the Provost remarks. First one was Cumnock Citizen of the Year. That was on the 11th of April. And a huge congratulations goes to Keith Campbell, who is a more than worthy recipient of 46 Cumnock Citizen of the Year. I was delighted to present Keith with an engraved quake on behalf of East Ayrshire and to congratulate him on his achievements. Keith's shown unwavering dedication to our communities through him and his team's incredible work keeping the area tidy, through litter picking, along with his invaluable contributions to many local projects. The Cumnock Citizen of the Year Award is chosen by the Ciaran McTurk Memorial Committee. Thanks to them, as it can't be an easy task to come to a decision when there's so many in the town worth a mention. Next is East Ayrshire Young Musician Final. This is held at the Grange Academy on Thursday the 24th of April. It was an absolute pleasure to go along to see the musician finals. The calibre of young people we have here in East Ayrshire never fails to amaze me. And the musical talent amongst them is no exception. The winner went to Gregor, who's in the middle in the picture up there. He's from Student Academy and he played a beautiful piece on a marimba. The first time I'd ever seen one of them in real life. It's like a huge xylophone. And as the winner, he's going to go to the national final at the Royal Conservatoire in Scotland in a few weeks to represent East Ayrshire. And my very big well done to everybody who performed on the evening. There's undoubtedly some incredible talent amongst our young people. VE Remembrance Day flag raising event. It was an honour to be joined by members of the Royal British Legion and many other guests to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe. A flag raising ceremony was held at Council headquarters before a special commemoration service in Reith Lane was held at the Cenotaph in Kilmarnock. It was a great turnout and it's vital that we mark this important anniversary to remember and give thanks to those who gave so much to secure a peace and freedom for future generations. Thank you to all who turned out to pay their respects and contributed, including pupils from some of our local schools and those who played instruments. VE Remembrance Day tea dance. This was at Partner Primary School. It's always a great day in Partner. And Saturday was no exception. They held a VE Day 80th anniversary tea dance where many school children performed and played their instruments. And there was much singing and dancing. I was especially moved by how everyone in the community came together for this, from the school children to the community and care home residents. The performances, readings and displays were beautiful tribute, and I thank Partner very much for the invite and the opportunity to participate in such a lovely day. Kilmarnock Football Club Player of the Year last Saturday. Deputy Provost and I attended Kilmarnock Football Club's Player of the Year Awards on Saturday evening. A very well done to Joe Wright winning the Player of the Year, which recognises consistently outstanding performances throughout the season. And well done must also go to Women's Player of the Year, Ailey Martin, for her consistent standout performances throughout her season. We also saw Kilmarnock legends Walter McRae, Ross Matthew, Paul Wright were introduced to the Kilmarnock Football Club's Hall of Fame. Mon McKillie. And the Auchinleck Talbot. So we'll just move on to business proper members. And first is declarations of interest. And David.
The items on the agenda today, Provost, I wouldn't be expecting any, but as always, members will be best aware. But I certainly wouldn't expect any from the agenda.
Any members have any conflicts? No, all good. Okay, we'll move on to the previous minutes that I'll submit for a correct record.
Second that, Provost.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Is there any questions on the minutes? Okay. Moving on to item 3 is the Cabinet Committee minutes, and I'll bring in Councillor Reid.
Who's that correct record, Provost? Second that, Provost.
Thank you, Leader and Deputy. Is there any corrections or questions on the minutes? Right, you're all good. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, arrangements for the strategic review of community safety and enforcement, and I'll bring in Eddie Fraser to speak to the report. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks very much, Provost. Morning, members. This short report is brought to Council as a follow-on from the Council meeting of the 27th of February, when members agreed to establish the Community Review of Community Safety and Enforcement. So members gave us a direction to do this, and clearly the scope of it came up through discussion rather than a clear, paper that came forward. So this year is just making sure that as we take forward that review, it's actually in line with what Council had asked us to do in terms of that. So the paper sets out that given the broad scope, we'll split the review into separate elements in terms of doing that. But the whole review will have one overall, sponsor in terms of the Deputy Chief Exec, who will then draw things together in terms of what's the synergies, across that, what are the commonalities in terms to take that forward in terms of, our best arrangements for that. The timescales for us carrying out, the review, will take us a number of months to actually do that and bring it back to members for approval. And we'll certainly be doing that, this year, hopefully in the autumn, to do that. But in the meantime, Council had set aside a specific resource in terms of, making sure we could facilitate, change in terms of that. So rather than that sit in the council bank, which is always a very nice thing if I've got some money in the bank, but it was given for a specific purpose, and rather than it sit there, the paper proposes that we do two things. First of all, in terms of some of that enforcement, we go out and we purchase additional, cameras in terms of public realm cameras, so that's, spend some of the money on a non-recurring basis. And also that in terms of greener communities, we give an allocation there to make sure that, the feelings within our towns and our villages are actually kept up to spec as we can while the review is going. So it's just about best use of the resources that actually Council has given us to do that. So the recommendations are set out in paragraph 2, and happy to take any questions or comments from members.
Leader.
Thanks very much. Welcome the report and welcome the initiative. I know we like to keep a tight control of spending, but good to see the money being used in terms of CCTV cameras, in terms of public realm. Maybe doing a bit of support to some of our community activists that are doing so much to help the litter problem, particularly in not just urban areas, but some of the rural areas. Some of the examples from local YouTubers in terms of what they've been finding is quite absolutely, there's absolutely no excuse for it when there's so much they can do, people can do in terms of charities looking for some of these materials, and they can be recycled, and they can make an appointment with the recycling centres as well. So it complements what a lot of what we're doing already, and just making our communities that wee bit brighter, despite some of the financial situation that we find ourselves. We're addressing what people are asking us to do, and have a wee bit of civic pride in our communities. And this is really, it's a start, but it's essential that we get that work done. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep, no, thanks, Leader. Councillor Cogley.
Yes, thank you very much. And just a few points to raise here. Paragraph 5, in the previous 2 years, we've allocated one-off funding for various initiatives, and civic pride, it never really got off the ground, and I think we have to recognise that that was because we found ourselves under economic constraints that we hadn't anticipated. We weren't actually doing the basic tasks that we should be doing, let alone the additional add-ons that we wanted to achieve through civic pride. So I think we have to be really aware of that in any programme that we implement going forward. We've got to do our bread and butter stuff first before we do the add-ons. The additional funding for the enforcement unit, and again, and of course this comes within David's area, and I know there have been massive frustrations in terms of recruiting because these were one-off expenditures, not permanent contracts, so very difficult to get staff on that basis. And again, I think we have to be aware of that. The Paragraph 6, number 1, desktop review of literature and best practice. And the first one that comes to my mind here is the consultation on litter and fly tipping that was carried out and completed in 2021, which just didn't tell us anything that we don't already know. And so I think, again, we have to be aware that some of these consultations that have taken place just don't inform us, and we need to be aware of that before we start relying on them and looking at them as sort of reinventing the wheel. But you know, let's be a little bit more careful about the information that they tell us, because there was nothing in that we didn't already know. As far as enforcement with litter and fly tipping, and Dougie, you just touched on that in relation to the YouTuber. Now, I've identified an organisation that can do enforcement for litter and fly tipping with no charge to us as a council, and can work in parallel with us. And they would come in and work for a period of perhaps 2 years. And once alongside and in parallel with our enforcement team, and once their work has been achieved and their revenue is from fining, and once behaviour has changed and the fines are then not producing a source of revenue for them, they would move away. And it's a tried and tested programme that has worked in other authorities south of the border. And again, Eddie, I think that this should be on the agenda for things for us to look at, because if it can make a difference and change behaviour, then and at no cost, then we really seriously should be doing it. My final point is in relation to antisocial behaviour, which of course I'm talking about later this morning, but I just wanted to sort of reserve my position in relation to that to say that my comments will come later. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley. Eddie.
Thanks, and thanks for the helpful comments, Councillor Cogley. That first part of paragraph 6 about desktop review is not only looking at what we've done locally, it's looking at practice, you know, in other places, and what is actually worked. There's a range of different things that people have done, and, you know, it would be about making clear that we're setting all them out, you know, what seems to have worked, what hasn't worked, what's been challenges, so that we do take that fully into consideration. That, you know, like, locally in terms of the team, we can talk about everything from taking that resource, that £700,000 that have been given to us, and actually just boosting up our existing teams. That would be one extreme. The opposite extreme would say, let's externalise this whole thing and get somebody else to, you know, to come in and do it. So there are a range of different things, and different localities have done it differently, and that's why that desktop review and actually setting out, you know, like what the different options are, and how the different options have been worked and evidence to work in different places are really important. So what you say is, like, helpful for us in terms of doing that. In terms of, the comments, I think, like the folk that we employed to do the Civic Pride team, if I can call them that, like, done great work. But you're right, like how you engage that, and it's what Blair's been trying to do, how you see that as not a separate thing from the wider work in greener communities is going to be one of the big tasks that we do here. So it's all very well putting additional resource in there. If you're reducing it down there, then you're actually not seeing any benefit. And there's an honesty around all that I know Blair's been working at just now as well in terms of the review already within greener communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Leader, yeah.
Thanks. No, I agree with what the Chief Executive said, and hopefully, and Councillor Cogley saying as well, in terms of, I think it's an objective that we all share in terms of improving our communities, but we've got to, we can learn from other authorities, other agencies, just what works best. But the point I was going to make in terms of recruitment, that has been an issue for, and I think it was discussed at Cabinet recently, and I think we've had a bit of success in terms of growing our own staff and in terms of apprenticeships, and possibly, I don't know if we're looking at internships, but I think if we need to go down that line, that's where we want to go, because our enforcement team's doing a really good job, and if we can, it's obviously difficult to recruit, but if we can get some people through our apprenticeship scheme working in that area, that can only be good.
Thanks, Leader. Councillor Linda Maiden.
Thank you, Provost. I've just got a wee question about paragraph 15 in relation to the redeployable cameras. I see the 6 that are going to be trialled. Have we identified the locations for these? And also, if we get the other 10, is there already areas that we're looking at putting them in place? Cheers.
So I'm going to pass to Blair in a minute about some of that, but the very fact that they're redeployable, genuinely, as we will move them about, they're these Dalek type things that, you'll see that we can move about in different places. Blair, do you want to come in and just give a bit of detail?
Through you, Eddie and Provost. So we have identified some locations for the deployment of these cameras, which are known hotspot areas. That's working out. So the cameras are in 2 parts, as set out within paragraph 15, 6 of which will be redeployed cameras for the benefit of David's team and enforcement. And in housing services, we'll have an additional 10 cameras. So we are aware of some hotspot areas. I could name a few of them just now, and probably you could as well, about where they will go. Do we have full locations for whole 16? Not at this moment in time, but we're just analysing our data to allow us to make best impact immediately when we are able to procure the cameras. The procurement process is in place. We're about to finalise our commodity strategy as well, which allows us to go out and actually get the cameras as quickly as possible. And I've given, I know in this chamber, assurances to some members about how important and how quickly we procure those items. So yes, we are clear on some of the locations. New Farm Lock and other areas clearly been identified historically as challenging areas, and we would be looking to deploy immediately.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, hopefully that'll make a real difference. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Provost. So in relation to paragraph 15 as well, and if I can take that back to the Provost remarks as well for Conduct Citizen of the Year, Keith Campbell, I think is in his acceptance speech at Dumfries House. I think one of his asks were, and it follows on for that we are listening to what the public are looking for as well, was deployable cameras. He does a fantastic job, Keith, and he deserves a mention in here once again for the fantastic work that he does. When we see these bags at the roadside, it's probably Keith and his team that's doing that all the way from Mauchline, believe it or not, up to Douglas. And I see him now, he's over the Sornway heading towards Golson as well. So it's absolutely amazing the work he does. But the question I have, about it's proposed that 20,000 is allocated for a trial. Will there be follow-on costs coming for that?
For you, Provost, apologies. Yes, so there are always on costs of having cameras because things get broken, they don't work, they're inclement weather, etc. can impact on them. However, this is new technology that we haven't had in East Ayrshire before. So effectively, if I could give some of the detail, would be that these are going to be battery operated cameras, which you'll know just now, and some frustrations we have in the chamber is about our ability to redeploy cameras because they must have an appropriate power source. This will remove that frustration for us all. And they will also be supported by solar panels as well, so that the batteries stay regenerated as much as possible, which means we have the most functionality out of them. So because it's new technology for us, we haven't had it before, but undoubtedly there will be costs that come down the line, but we would clearly have a clear maintenance plan supported alongside the acquisition of them, which would support us for X amount of years. I don't have the detail of how much that would be. Thank you.
You probably, I think in summary, once we've got the kit, any recurring costs would be either the maintenance cost, ultimately replacement cost, and any staff cost in deploying them from one location to another. But as Blair said, it's the cameras are there, it's getting the alternative power source, and it means you don't have those issues, the solar powered, etc., etc. So once we've bought the kit, then it can be redeployed, and the further costs on a recurring basis for using that kit would be the simple resource staff costs of moving it from A to B and setting it up.
Thank you. Is that okay? Yep. Thank you. Councillor John McFadden.
My question has largely been answered. Basically, it was going to be the same as the last two questions. So thank you very much.
No, that's fair, John. Important points. Absolutely. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Provost. Just like to go back to the comments made by Councillor Cogley, and I agree with 90% of what Sally said. I think we need to get the cameras out there, and we need to get the enforcement actions and the notices issued to the perpetrators. The last time we looked at enforcement numbers and the the bills being issued for sky tipping, etc., they were and are far too low. So we need to take action. The only thing I would disagree with is bringing in a private company to do that, because as we all know, private companies have shareholders that require dividends, and that would just be another mouth to feed in the whole process. For me, this is something that the council needs to take action on, and we need to do it internally. We need to get staff employed, and we need to get the cameras out there, and we need to get the fines issued. But I wouldn't go down the route of bringing in a private company to do that.
Thanks, Councillor Richardson. Eddie.
So I would just refer back to 6.1 that we will want to undertake a proper review of all the different options, about how we can do that, and then bring that back to members for decisions.
That okay? Yep. Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, no, we certainly welcome this report. We do have a major problem with fly tipping and litter across the whole of East Ayrshire. So it's really, really good that we're undertaking this review. Keith Campbell, as has been mentioned, has done an absolutely fantastic job across the area, certainly in the south of our area, because he's picked up hundreds and hundreds of bags of rubbish and just general stuff that's been dumped. One of the things I would say is, as we go through the review and Eddie takes this forward, I think for myself, ask that he perhaps include the group leaders of the groups within that review, so that we can actually have more of a sort of idea of where we're moving forward. That's what I'd say. But no, we certainly welcome everything that's in this report.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Colga, did you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you. Just back to Keith Campbell, just to say, last year alone, he collected 6,000 bags of litter from our roadsides. And that is 6,000 bags of failed public policy, however we look at it.
Provost, appreciate this as council members are entitled to their view. That's one way of looking at it in terms of failed public policy. Another way of looking at it is as who deposited the 6,000 bags of rubbish in the first place. And also, you know, there's national problem. We'll come to it in the context of the motion that's still to come in terms of the current national position as well as the local position. But I think as a council's monitoring officer, I would need to take issue with that assertion, Councillor Cogley, without being in any way difficult about it. I'm not sure that's a justifiable comment, but you are entitled to your opinion.
Yeah, Sally.
Yeah, just to come back on that, that wasn't failed public policy by us. That's failed public policy by UK government and Scottish government, because the direction has to come from the top. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley. Councillor Cannon.
Thanks, Chair. No, I think it's just, I don't disagree with anything that's been said this morning. I think it's just worth praising the work that has been done, you know, and I think the Facebook posts that have been put out just now, particularly around the penalties that are going out, I think is very helpful. And I think sharing that, I'm getting a lot of good feedback on with the Facebook groups in terms of that, because it is important to highlight what we are doing. It's important to highlight the penalties that are going out. Notwithstanding, I wouldn't disagree with anything that's been said this morning. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Linton.
Thanks very much, Provost. It was just going back to Jim's point on the ongoing costs and Blair's response. I was quite surprised as we've moved towards the LED light, and it's only 1 in 10 lampposts that actually have 240 volts at them. The rest are fed round about by low voltage, so that greatly restricts the capacity to cover the areas you want. Also, if you there will be a saving as we move away from main supplied CCTV cameras on these things. I mean, the cost of installing them, splicing it in a cable to power the units is considerable, whereas these things, you know, you're up at them with a cherry picker, you plonk them on and that's it, you walk away. So there's not really any setup cost in any of these new ones, so that greatly improves the technology that we're using. So I think there will potentially be a saving in that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks, Councillor Linton. Councillor Claire Maitland.
Thank you, Provost. In terms of cost, I think the social media recently that's been put out is very good, showing that we're out there, we're going to do enforcement. It's really shifted up a level and it's very good, as Stephen said. However, what's missing from that is the cost. We don't talk about the cost to landfill and the cost to our communities as well, and the feeling of unsafe, unwanted, uncared for. So I would like to see more information out there about how much litter and landfill costs all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Thanks, Councillor Maitland. Councillor Peter Mabin.
Thank you, Provost. Can I just make a comment, please, about health and safety with roadside litter picking? As I know my colleague, my wife, Councillor Linda Mabin, has requested a few times to get the main road litter picked a couple of times a year, and it's got to go through Ayrshire Roads Alliance, and they have strict safety procedures on how they do that litter picking task 2 or 3 times a year. I'd be worried that volunteer litter pickers out on some of our main roads, do they need a licence to go litter picking or permission to go litter picking? Do they have the correct health and safety procedures and protocols to do it safely? I know myself at Belfield Community Council, I have advised community councillors that volunteer litter pickers should not be on the road that passes the old Kirtlandside Hospital, which has a litter problem, and we have advised people that they shouldn't be out there volunteer litter picking. It's just too dangerous. They shouldn't be there. And if it gets really bad and they want it litter picked, I can ask Ayrshire Roads Alliance to do that for us. Thank you, Provost.
That's pretty much my understanding, yeah. Members will be aware that we don't control the trunk road, so the same applies, but in the form of Transport Scotland, so the litter picks on the 77, etc., 77, they are arranged by Transport Scotland. It's the same process. You'll actually, when you see the cones up and the signs up, you know, our workers picking up your litter cost lives. That's under, I think that's under a temporary road order to actually close one of the lanes to create that safe space so that cars aren't whizzing up the outside. We just had one of our housing vans get thumped by a BMW in the rear, just getting off at New Farm Lock at the slip load last night, and the BMW was going at 100 mile an hour. So you're quite right, there is processes and arrangements whereby that you can make arrangements for the roadside, the verges, the hedgeways to be cleared, but we wouldn't encourage folk just to go out and do it on a voluntary basis because the roads are nowhere near as safe as they used to be.
No, thanks. Leader?
Thanks. It's not just roads. There's also the issue, I think, with water bodies. It's great to see folk having litter pickups, but I think there's kind of hidden dangers that are not quite as obvious in there that we've got to, just help to, while we really support people that are doing litter pickups, there's kind of hidden dangers there. And we just need to be that wee bit careful and offer the best health and safety advice that we can. So I would support what Peter's saying.
Sorry. Councillor Boyd, is this in immediate relation to this? It's fine, and you go then.
Just to update the leader, Councillor Adams and myself will be the ones who's referring to cleaning up the Kilmarnock water in the town centre. David Duran has been on site with us in Clare Cavanagh. We've looked at health and safety, so everything's fine there, just to make the leader aware of that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Leader?
I was just making a general point because, we'll take health and safety advice, but obviously that encourages others to go down there. So there's, with discharge pipes and some of the things that are left in the rivers, and as well as water being obviously a natural hazard, there's dangers there for the public. I wasn't making any kind of specific.
Okay, right. Thank you. I'm a bit lost there, but that's fine. Councillor Jim Todd.
Thank you very much, Provost. It's just a position of clarity, Blair, if that's okay. And it's for these cameras that are coming, what's the process for deciding where they're going? Is each ward going to get 2 cameras each, or is it who decides where the cameras go and how long they stay there for? Thanks.
Through your Provost, so it will be based on data and intelligence. So we will know from an enforcement point of view where are commonly hotspot areas for fly tipping, for example. I would suggest that would be the areas that are identified. From a housing perspective, clearly my neighbourhood coaches are out in your ward all the time, and they are also pulling together for me some data around about commonly used locations, of which we will then determine where best to go first, and then we'll work our way back from there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Provost. It's relevant to Councillor Peter Maben's comments, and I appreciate David's information about responsibility for trunk roads. But just to point out how much of a concern safety is for litter pickers, on Tuesday on the Irvine bypass between Rickerton and the Lee Milton Mill, there was a lady on her own, no high vis, just out with a bin bag and a litter picker, litter picking around one of the litter pickers, roadside safety signs, and not just the danger to traffic, but someone being out there on their own without anyone, and there's real concerns. These notices that are put out there by Transport Scotland, whatever it is, don't seem to be deterring people, and I just think if there's anything the council are putting out about litter picking, if that can somehow be highlighted, even though it's not council roads, it's still probably constituents of people in this room. Thanks.
No, that's a really fair point. Thanks. And it's folk that are really caring in our communities, and it's such a shame. Councillor Hogg online.
Thanks, Provost, and I appreciate everybody's comments and all very valid. Can I just ask a point though? As you know, the rural areas are particularly badly hit. And as you know, Lochdoon is quite a jewel in the crown for East Ayrshire Council. And with wild camping and increasing fly tipping and activity down there, it would be good to see the rural areas getting represented by some of the cameras, because it is an extremely rich resource for us all down there. So if that could be bear in mind, I would appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Blair.
You, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Hogg. So Lochdoon is a particularly challenging area for us right now. Richard Greaveson and I went to the Lochdoon recently to meet with residents of the area to fully understand the extent of the challenges they're experiencing living there with those that are visiting. So I wrote to those residents again just yesterday, and I will have a multi-agency meeting taking place in the next couple of weeks with Police Scotland, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, East Ayrshire Leisure Trust, our own services, including enforcement, antisocial behaviour. And we would be bringing specifically an action plan together for lockdown to be enacted with immediate effect to cover us over that sort of summer period. So we'll be bringing that plan together to deal with it specifically, recognising the extreme challenges that they're experiencing, especially because of the good weather just now. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Blair. Is that okay, Councillor Hogg?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks so much for that.
Okay, no, thank yous. Councillor Graham Barton.
Thanks, Provost. A couple of questions for Blair. It's really about I welcome the 254,000 for the Civic Pride, but what I'm kind of interested in is the allocation of those Civic Pride team resources, Blair. It's very easy to become very command-centric. I just want to ensure that we get a fair allocation to our villages. I'm thinking my own ward, the likes of Hurlford Cricket Home, a week's worth of the team going there could be transformational for the small villages. So it's just to ensure that we get a fair balance of the workload. And the second question is round about the deployable cameras. See the associated infrastructure. Does that include the signage? We'd really want the signage within all our hotspots so that these fly tippers don't know where the cameras are. They could possibly be there at any given time. So is there allocated spend towards that?
I'll take the second one first. Yeah, it will include the signage because in order to comply with RIPSA, public realm CCTV needs to be known. You don't tell them exactly where it is, but you need signs up that let people know that anything they may do there is being recorded without directing them at the cameras. So the signage is part of that.
You, Provost, in regards to the balancing of workloads, so members will recall that Civic Pride has now been over 2 financial years. The first year, the focus, as asked by Council, was that the focus was town centres. It was Kilmarnock and Cumnock predominantly. And in year 2, that was asked to be spread out to towns and villages and other communities. So that was our focus in year 2. Clearly, the resource that comes with the funding that's been allocated is modest in terms of the content of what that would be required. So our aspiration would be that we reach every town and village, but I think some expectation setting round about what might actually be achieved. We will do our absolute best, as you would always expect from us. And we will look to target those communities that have not yet had any touch points of Civic Pride team as well, to ensure that you see it when you're in and around your communities. Thank you.
Yep, no, thanks very much for that. Councillor John McFadden.
Question for Blair. The cameras that we've got and the ones that were coming, do they all need to be mounted on street furniture, lampposts and bits and pieces, or any of them freestanding?
Through you, Provost. So the existing infrastructure we have all must be sited on street lighting for the power source. These new cameras will give us much more flexibility of where they can be mounted to. There will be no freestanding cameras. We are aware, and through some national conversations as well, that they tend to be a focus for vandalism as well. So we won't have any freestanding cameras as part of our new acquisition.
So the likes of the slip roads in and out of Fenwick and New Farm Loch and places where there is really no appropriate places to mount them, will some of will they be able to sit in vehicles that are parked up then or something? Because some of the areas where they need to coverage the most, from recollection, there's very unlikely there's anywhere to put them, as in on street furniture or somewhere where they'd be safe. So are we considering getting, cameras that could sit within vehicles that could be parked up? People don't know whether they're parked, broken down or whatever, but the cameras could be hidden within vehicles, because I think there's a great need to cover some of the areas that probably don't have appropriate street furniture to mount them on. Because some of the roads in and out of Fenwick, the rubbish is staggering. I mean, the number of bags you see when the litter pickers go out there, 40 and 50 bags, because I've picked them up and taken to the dump. And that's just in one weekend. So, I mean, I think we need to have really good flexibility with these cameras before we actually buy them all, because some of them definitely need to be movable to places that don't require street furniture, in my opinion.
David?
I think the trick is not to give away too much of the detail to those that might want to remove the cameras as soon as we put them in. there are different options now. We had a pilot before in the Irvine Valley for a week or two, I think last year, where we deployed officers with the cameras in a car to see if we could catch folk throwing litter out of cars. On the 4 days they were there, no offences were committed for the duration of that. But yeah, they can go in cars, they can go on other things. It won't be restrictive. We'll find there are solutions. There are different options now for mounting these cameras. They're much smaller, they are more portable. And as I say, without getting into too much detail, wherever the hotspots are, we'll be looking to deploy the cameras. Maybe take any of the rest of that offline, so we're not giving anything away that we wouldn't want to give away just now, or getting into the design detail of the matter. But the principle is that where we have evidence of hotspots, of repeat issues, and we get that from yourselves and local communities as well as complaints, direct complaints, then we will prioritise and deploy the resources that are available in the best way possible.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
It was just to say to Councillor McFadden, they can definitely be camouflaged in some way, John, because I was part of the pilot that David refers to, and we had a spot just out in the countryside at just off the Comores Road, splitting away, heading for the golf course that sits out in the countryside. There's a wee substation that was a hotspot. It was getting fly tipped 3 times a week, and we put the signage up about there being a camera there. That's basically solved the problem. I've not seen any fly tipping since. I've went round a good few times and stared over the fence and tried to see a camera, but whoever's installed it's done a really good job. But it's camouflaged really well because you can't see the camera. I can't see the camera anywhere, but the signage is enough to turn the fly tippers away. And I think it's a good thing that we're only going to have 10 of these camera units, but put as many as the signs out as we want, guys, because the sign will turn them away. The sign will make them go elsewhere. Whether there's a camera on them or not, I think anyway.
Thank you. Remember that this is a review that's going to be coming back as well, so we can get all the finite detail soon. I've got Councillor Hogg, then Councillor Cogley, then we'll look to move on unless anybody's got burning things. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you. Just one thing I was wanting to ask in relation, as you know, with rural areas, access to the likes of the scares is quite a distance, and a lot of people obviously don't have that transport to get their waste away, and neither can they afford the uplifts for some of it. Is there any cross-border type of agreement with, for example, South Ayrshire, where access to waste recycling would be a lot easier, that would help these communities in that aspect?
Yeah, Blair.
Through you, Provost. So at this moment in time, we do not have the ability for people to take their waste to another local authority area. We're very clear in terms of people having a permit, so we can confirm that we're accepting people who live in our area's waste, and you'll be familiar with that if you've been to the Household Waste Recycling Centre recently. So no reciprocal arrangements are in place at this moment in time. However, just to note that we are having ongoing conversations with South Ayrshire in particular, round about just some future vision about shared services, and that may or may not come into focus as part of that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Blair. Thank you. David?
Unless you know someone with a South Ayrshire postcode.
Members will bring one more person and then we'll look to move on if that's okay. Councillor Cogley.
Yeah, thank you. And just to refer to Councillor Richardson's comment about signage, and he's absolutely spot on. If we put up 10 signs for every single camera, it will have a massive deterrent impact. Well raised.
Okay, yeah. Leader?
Thanks, Professor. Thanks for letting us in. It's just to conclude, I think we've heard this morning all 32 members have got a real interest in this, and I know the review is going to be operational, but I think it's really important that everybody's involved in the review where we can, and just make that comment to all in the chamber.
Yep, no, thanks, Leader. No, ward's the same, so absolutely. Is Council happy to agree this report? We'll come back and have this discussion again, need it. Thanks, everybody. So we'll move on to the motions, and the first motion will be held by Councillor Reid, and I'll pass over to Councillor Reid to present his motion.
Thanks very much, Provost. Just quite a straightforward motion. Basically, I was delighted to see that Halo, Kilmarnock and XLCC have entered into an exclusivity agreement that is expected to see the sales and project delivery headquarters of subsea cable and manufacturing company XLCC being established at the Halo Enterprises Innovation Centre in Hill Street, Kilmarnock. XLCC plan to bring 1,200 jobs to new jobs to Ayrshire, with the UK's first subsea cable factory in Hunterston, and this partnership will result in more than 300 high-quality jobs being brought to Kilmarnock, covering a wide range of professional disciplines. An investment of this magnitude will boost the economy and be a catalyst for regenerating the engineering sector, both locally and regionally. And I've got to say, we've got a really strong engineering sector, and that was something we had discussions recently. I attended at the Ayrshire College with Eddie and other two chief executives and our two leaders, and it's sometimes nationally, Scotland and UK level, and at both levels, it's sometimes not acknowledged, I would say, by both governments, and it's something we really need to fight to get on the agenda, and that's something we can do working with our partners, community planning partners, and through the Ayrshire Growth Deal itself. This agreement, in principle, is to be welcomed, as it will support our communities with these high-quality jobs and hopefully training opportunities that will come along with it. However, I'm aware that clarification is required from the UK government on proposals to deliver the green investment strategy and how they will support UK companies to develop and fund major infrastructure projects in the short term prior to the worldwide contracts being realised over the next few years. Just recently, myself, the Deputy Leader and senior officers have been touring some of the engineering businesses across East Ayrshire, and it really would surprise you the number of businesses that are developing. We only saw that in Comores and recently with two businesses in that village alone. They're really getting strong connections with green energy and net zero, and it's really expanding. So sometimes we don't boast about what we've got in our own doorstep in Ayrshire, and certainly in East Ayrshire, and we need to do a lot more of that. And maybe, hopefully, that will help to attract these jobs and more jobs within the green energy sector and net zero sector to come here. So therefore, I would propose that the Council write to the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero to request an early meeting to clarify the UK Government's proposal to progress the delivery of this project at pace, and hopefully have a satisfactory outcome for the people of East Ayrshire and the wider Ayrshire community.
Great, thank you, Leader. Deputy Leader.
Yeah, I would certainly second the motion, and on the visits to the local businesses, it's through the funding received for the 5G stuff. We have saw the potential and expansion. Some predict almost 50% and 100% doubling their business. So it's great for the engineers and that training perspective for the jobs. It was great, and it was an absolute pleasure for me to see the amount of females that was involved in engineering and taking up their roles. So that was really encouraging, but I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I'll open it up to the floor if MD's got any. Councillor Boyd.
Thanks, Provost. Yep, I'm supportive of this motion as well. Anything that brings jobs into East Ayrshire, Kilmarnock, obviously is really welcome. I remember seeing it online when it was announced, and I felt it was quite low key. It was in a radio station, which isn't really local. So, the local press didn't seem to pick up on this. I think it's really good. I think the Halo, if I'm honest, has been disappointing. That it was launched in 2012 at its initial meeting, huge big plans. Most of it hasn't happened. Most of the upper floor is underused. So if that's where it's going to go, I think it's brilliant to get these high quality jobs into the Halo, knock-on effect for the wider area. So that's great. Just one wee point, car parking is quite tight there with the college and the Halo at present. So if this, which I really want to happen, we maybe just need to think about where these cars are going to park. And I know we are encouraging walking and cycling, but realistically there'll be cars there, because even with the Halo as at present, the parking spaces are really tight. Just to think about, but 100% behind this.
I know that's absolutely fair. Yep. Thank you. Councillor Linda Maben.
Thank you, Provost. On behalf of the Labour Group, we'd just like to absolutely and wholeheartedly support the Leader's motion and welcome the recent investment by XLCC, creating the 1,200 highly skilled jobs and apprenticeships across Ayrshire. I'm aware that they've been in discussion, with the UK Government for some months, and our local MP has been in contact with the CEO as well as the Minister for Energy to offer support to the project, and the discussions are ongoing. There has been an initial 20 million investment announced to support XLCC, with the possibility and potential for a further 67, depending on certain milestones. Okay.
That's great, Councillor Maben, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Watts.
Yeah, I would just like to echo really what's been said by everyone. The Conservative group certainly welcome this. The economic benefits that this will bring to Kilmarnock will be just absolutely fantastic. So we completely support this.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Everybody else okay? Online? Yeah, we're happy to agree the motion? Yeah, that's agreed. Thank you, everyone. Second out of our 3 motions, we have a motion by Councillor Cogley, and I'll just pass to Councillor Cogley to speak on our motion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And my motion is as follows. This East Ayrshire Council should actively promote and support the use of all the enforcement measures contained in the Antisocial Behaviour, etc. Scotland Act 2004. First of all, I'm going to set out some context and then talk about the legislation and then refer to the consequences of inaction. And I recognise in saying all of this that this is an issue that impacts on all of us as elected members. And I do politely ask in our debate today that we try to put our political differences aside. And so from those on my right who are to the left, from those on my left who are to the right, and I've been looking forward to saying that, and from those in the front row, and of course to the cohort of independent elected members. So please, let's put our political differences aside. I regularly attend walkabouts within my communities, and recently attended one organised by members of the community. In attendance were elected members plus officers from housing and communities. This area is benefiting from a huge investment in housing repairs plus other infrastructure improvements. It's a community that has huge levels of deprivation which are exhibited stereotypically. And I've known this community and more particularly the members within it for many, many years. And sadly, during the course of this visit, I sensed a feeling of despair way beyond that which I have previously experienced, both from members of the community and from council operatives who work within the community. And what I detected was just total despair. And the despair is caused by a number of different examples, which I'll just mention a few. Extensive littering, broken glass in recreation areas, and this is repeat behaviour on a weekly basis and continues. Dog fouling, quads and motorbikes being ridden in recreation areas. One road so uncared for that it could have been a scene from a horror movie. Vacant properties, shouting, general disruption by individuals, and uncared for communal areas. And most poignantly, a new bus shelter had been vandalised by 2 young people wielding golf clubs, witnessed but not reported. There's no point. Neither the police nor East Ayrshire will or can do anything. And that really stung when I heard that. It really stung. And the residents within this community, they clearly like us, but seem to have lost all faith in our ability to address these issues. And we, like the police, are viewed as ineffective and powerless. And I'm going to digress from my narrative for one moment, because I know all elected members in this room will have examples of antisocial/criminal behaviour in their wards. And I know further examples I'm sure will follow during the ensuing debate. But it includes, and again non-exhaustively, people with knives, youths throwing masonry from the multi-storey car park, groups of young people fighting on buses, intimidating behaviour on buses, such that bus travel ceases to be an option, groups of youths congregating at the bus stations in both Kilmarnock and Cumnock, and our own planning officers being violently threatened while carrying out their jobs. So back to my narrative. This community is terrorised by a small cohort of disengaged and antisocial people across the age ranges, and surely we should be stepping in here to address it. And my fear is that what we have is a petri dish in which we're germinating the criminals of the future, people who are growing up with no concept of right or wrong. We know that we have numbers of young people not engaged with education, etc., and with parents who have exactly the same problems as their children. And surely it's our responsibility here to step in and to provide guidance. I frequently hear the term corporate parenting. Any parenting role comes with responsibility, and that means we need to take the appropriate interventions and take action. Where we see antisocial or criminal behaviour, we need to face up to it and we need to address it. By not doing so, we're condoning it and we're normalising it. All individuals need to understand that there are consequences to actions or inactions. And by not addressing this behaviour, we're abdicating from our responsibility as corporate parents and cultivating worse behaviour for the future. The impact on our communities by our failure to act is very destructive, and similarly on our employees who work within these communities. I frequently hear the phrase, we don't want to criminalise our young people. We're not. They're doing it themselves, but we allow it because we don't correct it. And in the knowledge that behaviours will worsen as the young people grow up without any form of learned correction. We must remind ourselves here that corrective interventions only lead to criminal consequences in the worst cases. The impact of our failure to act has huge implications on our communities and the individuals within our communities, and in particular upon those members of our communities upon whom we are increasingly dependent as the role of local authorities is diminished. Again, quite simply, we're letting these people down. If we want our communities to do their bit, we need to do ours. When change occurs incrementally, we accommodate it and we normalise it. And this is what's happened, in my opinion, in relation to antisocial behaviour. Those of us who sit on the GNS committee will, later this year, be participating in a much-needed scrutiny assessment of violence in our schools. How on earth have we got here? Earlier this year, I heard one of the most enlightened speeches or lectures that I have heard for a long time. This is Gareth Southgate delivering the Dimbleby lecture. And what I would say to anybody who hasn't listened to this lecture, please do so. He referred extensively to parenting in whatever form it takes and to positive role models. So as an aside, I would urge any of you here to listen to that lecture if you haven't yet done so. As far as the legal position is concerned, the Scottish Government, when it passed into law the Antisocial Behaviour Act in 2004, clearly intended that we as local authorities should do something about this. And I cannot put it better than to quote the government's own words. All of us, the Scottish Executive, local agencies and local communities, have a responsibility for tackling antisocial behaviour. But it is local communities and local agencies who are in the driving seat. They have a key part to play, supported by the Executive. We want to encourage local communities and local agencies to put a stop to antisocial behaviour. And by way of reminder, I'm quoting here from the ministerial guidance. We're playing our part. We recognise that there is a lack of support for ordinary people affected by antisocial behaviour. This undermines their confidence, which means that they will not report antisocial behaviour when it happens, as in the example I've just stated earlier, or take a stand against it. People need to know what can be done, and in some cases, what can't be done. And if they're suffering from antisocial behaviour, they need to know who they should contact for help in particular situations, and they need to feel confident to do this. This is why, as part of our communication strategy, we are telling the public what services are on offer and what help they can expect from their local agencies. So that is a quote from the ministerial guidance that supports the 2004 Act. And under the Act, there is a strategy, an ASB strategy. I'm not going to go into the detail with that because I don't think there's a need to in this forum. But the basic premise is that under the Act, every local authority, together with the relevant Chief Constable, must prepare, publish and review a strategy for dealing with ASB in their council area. Part 2 of the Act goes on to talk about ASBOs, and Part 3 of the Act goes on to talk about the dispersal of groups. And these are powers that our police have, and we should be supporting them in using those powers. The Independent Working Group on Antisocial Behaviour has recently
Sally, just your 1 minute warning for your 10-minute intro, okay?
Okay. The Independent Working Group on Antisocial Behaviour has reported back, and there's an extensive document. I'm not sure that it tells us the huge amount that is new. It emphasises the need for early intervention, plus it states that local authorities should publish a dedicated ASB strategy as required by the Act, rather than including ASB within wider strategies. I repeat my opening sentence. This East Ayrshire Council should actively promote and support the use of all of the enforcement measures contained in the Antisocial Behaviour Scotland Act 2004. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cogley. Do you have a seconder for your motion? Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Provost. I endorse all my colleague has said, and I'm going to add the following. It's often said children are different nowadays. We often read of it and hear of it. I don't agree. Children have always been children. Bit of mischief, seeing how far they can push things. That's all part of growing up. What's actually changed is society, adults, with lowered expectations, lack of discipline, and an acceptance of disrespect and antisocial, even criminal behaviour. Instead, children need rules or limits, what I would call boundaries, not sycophantic praise or giving in to their every whim. If society realised children actually want rules, limits, consequences, and of course praise and rewards when appropriate, you would find the children rise to this challenge, respect this as a norm, and with the bonus of building resilience, which presently is often sadly lacking. Now, this legislation from the Scottish Government, which provides the tools to enable local authorities to tackle the lack of boundaries, antisocial and criminal behaviour. I'm aware I'm focusing on young people, but as my colleague said there, these young people often become offending adults. Therefore, I support my colleague in the motion. This council should actively promote and support the use of all enforcement measures contained in the Antisocial Behaviour, etc. Scotland Act 2004, which specifically refers to making use of under 16 ASBOs and also dispersal orders.
Thank you. David.
I think maybe just to try and provide some context for the benefit of all members, because clearly this covers a wide range of council activity. I think to just try and set some of the four corners, Blair's can speak to our general approach to antisocial behaviour. Obviously sits within that particular service, but supported by other services, including regulatory with the Corporate Enforcement Unit and legal supporting the applications for antisocial behaviour orders, etc., etc. So it is a corporate approach. I think the first point to make, as members will be aware, is of the complaints we receive about antisocial behaviour, around 13% relate to young people. So that's part of that context. The legislation came in '99. It was tidied up and kind of repackaged with wider powers in the 2004 Act. And the Scottish Government certainly at that time set out its stall, and fair enough, that's 21 years ago. Where does the time go? As they believed authorities were then presented with all the tools in the box they needed and over to authorities to make best use of them. Clearly over that period, the more recent review by the current Scottish Government or the independent working group set up by them, they published in February, and apologies to Council, I'm only just caught up with that, so I'm not going to sit here and go through it in great depth and pretend any spray on expertise, as a former colleague used to refer to, but we do need to have cognizance to the wider recommendations there, which I will touch on, because I think they have to influence that context within which any action we take is move forward. I think in coming to any decisions today, Council absolutely also needs to recognise certain other points. One is that certain other matters aren't in our gift. and I'll come back to that. We do need to take, therefore, partners with us in that regard. For instance, the antisocial behaviour orders for adults, fine, that's the local authority leading that. We work with police partners, etc., etc. You can apply for those, whether it's antisocial behaviour, sub-criminal conduct, and or criminal conduct is involved there, and we've got a good record in increasing numbers in terms of that. So unless members really want to go there, I would suggest we can set aside just now our overall response in terms of those elements. In terms of young people, if members are of the view that whatever we're doing just now, and I'll keep this general, may not seem to be sufficient given what has been witnessed and experienced in communities, then at one level it's absolutely right and incumbent on the council to undertake appropriate action to be satisfied that we are indeed doing everything we can and should be doing. In terms of the underage ASBOs, what I would stress, going back to the point about the need to have a joint approach with partners, and this is not excuse making, this is not hand wringing, this is just the facts of it. For an underage ASBO, the first thing that would need to happen is for there to be a children's hearing, and for the children's hearing to take a view and feed that into the sheriff. A sheriff can't grant an underage ASBO without that children's panel being set up. The current approach overall, and it isn't just associated with one service or one point of view, but across partners, the current approach is to consider if there's criminal conduct with young people, what's the most appropriate route. In the majority of cases, out with the most serious charges. And remember, one doesn't fit all. A young person might be going through this for the first time, they might be going through it for the 10th time. In some cases, they might be going through it for the 100th time. And it's therefore about having that ability to react to different cases. The rationale you might apply to a first offender, it might not be the same rationale you might apply to a repeat offender. But in any respect, if a child or a young person commits a criminal offence, and if society, and I'll put it as broad as that, but if the overall society apparatus has no appetite to prosecute the young person, and instead it is, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, and instead it's considered appropriate, having regard to the UNCRC as well, which is also a relevant legal consideration in terms of the rights of the children and all of this, then if that decision and if the response of society is a preferred approach that they be referred to the panel and put through the children's panel process, then that's something the council needs to work within, influence as it can, but recognise it's not entirely within the council's gift, simply to elect tomorrow that we'll start doing underage ASBOs in given circumstances. I think it shouldn't be ruled out, and my point would be that the motion doesn't bring to the front or the fore that there's never been a policy decision, there's never been a minuted recorded decision anywhere by the council that it wouldn't undertake certain actions or it wouldn't use certain powers. It's just been as a matter of practice that, and I think in the early days we did actually, and some colleagues have been here long enough believe that anecdotally we did have some early child or underage as under 16 ASBOs, but latterly in the last long couple of decades that has not been the practice. Instead, most of the cases that could go that way go instead through the panel, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's what happens. So it's not quite the same as matters not been dealt with, it's how effectively we're dealing with them. In terms of the dispersal powers referred to, they are entirely within the gift of the Chief Constable. And again, it's maybe not for us to be sitting to be seen to be telling others what they should do in isolation, but certainly that's part of the overall conversation. The police use them as an example. The only one I'm aware of was with all the boy racers up in the front, the seafront at Aberdeen a few years back, where that was becoming a problem with them all when they sit in the rev the cars and what else they do. All of that, then the police have used them, but they're not something that they use that often, and I think that's a legitimate question, not to pass the buck, not to defer or deflect, but taking the motion as it is, which is we should be using all the powers. Then if you extend that we to us and our partners, it isn't just about underage ASBOs either. A couple other points, reference was made to, we do have other statutory duties, and with the best will in the world, we absolutely have to obtemper them and can't just choose to ignore them. There are statutory duties in relation to looked after and accommodated children in terms of that corporate parenting role. We have our own promise in terms of how we say we'll deal with children. And I think what it all comes down to is we need to get to a point where, as a council, we are and in a position to use the powers in appropriate cases and it isn't about all across the board or one solution fits all. Finally, Provost and members, just now, just to try and help set that context, reference was made by Councillor Cogley to the report from the working group in February. And I think there are a few pertinent points that just, again, inform that context, because the very main recommendations, and as I said, I'm only just coming to terms with this, so bear with me, but the first one was that Scotland, it says, can't look at antisocial behaviour in isolation. So you think, God, we're away to Scandinavia again to see what they're doing. But no, that means you have to look at the causes. You look at the deep-rooted social issues, the overall context. So I just throw that in there. What they say at the end of the recommendation one on a national level is that they set up an oversight board on a national basis to support a whole system approach to drive change, commissioning work organisations to support change and meet identified actions, develop a framework for strategic deployment of resources, provide leadership to the sustainable delivery of upstream prevention and achieve effective partnership working. I think the gist of what I've been able to paraphrase from this is that where we're at locally in terms of what should we be doing and can we be doing more to address the situations and what's happening in our communities is the same picture at a national level. That's the question they're asking. They go on in recommendation 2, and I'm not prolonging this any longer than necessary, but in recommendation 2 they say that the current legislation definition and guidance is reviewed, should be reviewed and revised. They think it should consider what support and training will need to be provided and how any new legislation. Their view is that it needs to clarify blurred lines between non-criminal and criminal forms of behaviour and other things. So they feel the legislation needs to be changed, but that doesn't mean we do nothing in a vacuum until that happens. I'm just letting you know that that's in the pipeline. They talk about data and information, which we'll skip. They talk about prevention, and the group recommended the development of a preventative framework outlining the supports and resources within public services to achieve upstream prevention, encompassing tests of change and scaling up evidence-based existing preventative activities to be rolled out across the country. And again, it isn't about that one solution, but members will be aware that there is a very important piece here, which is about the positive alternatives, the diversionary activity. I don't want to paraphrase it as the football clubs and the dance clubs, but those things work. I know folk that are in the provision of that, and they may not get everybody, and they may not deter everybody from behaving in a certain way, but they do change some people's lives, and they do reduce the numbers that may go and behave in a different way, in an antisocial way. They also have a number of recommendations under situational action, but what I will cut to is, firstly, they do recommend that all local authorities review and update their current antisocial behaviour strategy, arrangements and strategies to ensure a dedicated focus and spend on the prevention and addressing of antisocial behaviour. Local authorities should publish the dedicated strategy and have it stand alone rather than, I think, as ours is at the moment, have it as part of a wider document and action plan. So what that all comes to as a council is clearly the current strategy. I think it's badged as a policy procedure, but to all intents and purposes, it is the strategy. That does need to be reviewed, certainly on the back of this recommendation, but that's probably where we were at anyway. And what I would suggest to council as a starting point is, depending what position council takes, is that if we are going to be reviewing and revising and providing and coming back to council with a revised and a new 2025 antisocial behaviour strategy, is that we take the forward consideration. You remit us to bring back the strategy. We bring back the strategy, align it to the matters that have been considered in the rest of the enforcement review that was referred to in the earlier paper, because there's no point in the strategy pulling us in a different direction. Align it with that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be completed at the same time as that wider review, and bring back the strategy to this council for this council to decide whether or not that 2025 version of the strategy is sufficient for your purposes and goes far enough. I don't think there's much more that we can decide in isolation. I think that would be the sensible way, subject to the mood and decision of council, and that strategy would of course include consideration and set out the circumstances and the requirements where each measure that is available under the current legislation would be utilised, or at least brought into consideration in appropriate cases, and the kinds of thresholds for those cases. So it's not everybody should be straight to an underage ASBO, but if you have folk that are repeat offenders, maybe it should legitimately be one of the considered options. But all I can say to close is if there is no appetite to prosecute a young person, and I'm not saying there should or there shouldn't be, there is or there isn't, but if there's no appetite to prosecute a young person for that original criminal behaviour, then we all just need to understand that you put them on an ASBO, and okay, that's fine, you put them on an ASBO, and the intent of the ASBO would be restrictions: don't go out at night, don't be here at night, don't do that at night, don't do this, sub-criminal. If they breach the ASBO, the key point is that's a criminal offence. So there needs to be that appetite that wasn't necessarily there to prosecute for the originating offence, but there needs to be an acceptance that if you've taken this measure, and some folk will hopefully benefit from that and maybe temper the ASBO and maybe don't need to go on, but then you'll have some who will breach the ASBOs, and the appetite will need to be there to deal with the breach of ASBO, and only that is a criminal offence, so the appetite will need to be there to then prosecute that criminal offence, because if it just goes back to the panel, all you've done is squared the circle. And I'm not being either negative or defeatist, I'm just giving you the process as it stands in the current legislation in terms of those underage. So one, it's not just in our gift to decide, but let's develop the strategy in conjunction with the Chief Constable. And two, as I say, let's recognise that if we push this unilaterally in order to get to what we think would be a better outcome, it's still not in our gift to operate some of this without the input and the agreement of partners going forward. And I think the way to secure that and have that wider multi-partner debate is through the development of the strategy and bring it back here. And if that's not enough for the council, that's when we can refine it and amend it to meet with council's wishes. But I think you need to see that to see where the gaps might be. But that's just my view.
Thank you for the context, David. Blair, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Provost, and thanks to David for setting that strategic focus and direction of travel for us there. I think just to give some context to members in the chamber and some reassurances round about the money that was allocated in 23-24 to the antisocial behaviour team, whereby I was given one-off monies to bolster our response to antisocial behaviour. Through management action, I've actually been able to make those arrangements now permanent. So at our resource, we have a team manager and 6 antisocial behaviour officers and an admin support, which is the most resource I've ever had in terms of leading the antisocial behaviour service. And specifically around about failure to act, I just want to be clear that what we've seen from 23-24 to 24-25 is we've seen significant increases in our activity around about antisocial behaviour, and I'll set out some facts. In terms of the issuing of first warning letters, we've seen a 50% increase. Second warning letters, a 47% increase. Final warning letters, 48% increase. Our use of interim ASBOs has increased by 33%, and indeed our ability in securing ASBOs in conjunction with David's legal team, that we've seen an 82% increase in securing ASBOs for those people that act in an antisocial way. There is no failure to act here. We are acting as much as we can and as quickly as we can, recognising the challenging context that sit within, and as David set out. So I just wanted to give some reassurance to members that we are working extremely hard and we are doing everything we can based on current arrangements to take action against those people that act in an antisocial way, because we find it wholly unacceptable. Thank you.
That's great, Blair. Thank you. Councillor Cogley.
Thank you. And Blair, thank you. I have huge respect for your team, absolutely huge respect for them. And just to refer back to some of the comments, David, that you've made, as far as the review of the legislation is concerned, of course, because legislation is being reviewed, it doesn't mean it will be changed. It might be hinted at, but we don't know that for sure. And it could take years for any changes in legislation to be made. And what we don't want to be doing is sitting here not doing anything when we know we have a huge problem. What we're doing at the moment isn't working. We've got to do something differently. My concern, my bigger concern, and I've used this phrase petri dish previously, we have a petri dish for the rise of extreme minority political parties. And we've all seen evidence of this happening south of the border. And this is arising because of a huge disillusionment and disenchantment with local government and with national government. And we've got to do something very quickly to change antisocial behaviour within our society, because it is going to have a huge adverse impact upon us if we don't. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley.
Just for clarity, I'm not by any means suggesting we wouldn't look at revising and bringing back a 2025 strategy. That's why I said 2025 strategy. I'm not suggesting we wait for any revise to the legislation. That would be years. I'm suggesting, yes, we come back with a refreshed strategy that sets out exactly under the current legislation what our approach going forward would be, taking account of all the measures, and bring that back to council. I'd said to you in conversation, if we can get that, I'm talking about the next few months, ideally, others will be preparing it, but the Community Planning Partnership Board obviously meets in September, and that felt like a reasonable milestone if we can have their agreement to that, stressing that multi-agency point and get it to council either side of that meeting. But that's the kind of timescale. I think I agree with you. We absolutely need to come back to council with a 2025 East Ayrshire anti-social behaviour strategy that reflects certainly the current legislation and current thinking, but has to be cognizant of that emerging and potential direction of travel, given that some of the other recommendations from the independent working group on young people are, again, reinforcing at a national level some of those alternative views and some of those alternative options, and as well as early intervention and prevention and the distraction, and also, as I say, flagging up that the UNCR is another, it's not a game changer, but it's something else that needs to be taken into account. Any decisions we're taking now about how we're going to deal with children and young people need to be compliant with that as well. So I'm not saying we wait, I'm saying we will bring back the strategy if that's what council's happy with. Well, we're going to have to do that anyway, and I'm suggesting that in terms of the debate today, we take away from council that direction, we bring back the antisocial strategy, and at that point it will be for this council to tell us as officers, does it go far enough or not?
Okay, thanks, David. I'll open it up to the floor, and first to have Councillor McGregor.
Thank you very much, Provost. I'm happy to support Councillor Cogley's motion. I just have a couple of points, if I may. My first point, and it kind of alludes to some of the things that Blair said about how the authority has taken this very seriously. I was very pleased to accompany the Deputy Chief Executive recently to an area in Darvel and speak to residents there who are being directly affected by serious issues regarding antisocial behaviour, which will be exacerbated with the good weather. So I can absolutely attest to the fact that this has been taken seriously, which I appreciate. My second point is just with regards to sometimes with this kind of conversation, there can be a narrative around criminalising certain groups in our society. I don't believe that's where this motion is coming from, and I don't look at it that way. I'm looking at it as a desire to use provisions in an existing law to help support and protect the residents of East Ayrshire. And, you know, the residents of East Ayrshire very much includes all of our young people, and I just want to make it very clear that I still wholeheartedly believe that the vast majority of our young people are law-abiding and assets to our community. So any narrative around, you know, demonising young people is something I would not hold truck with, but I have no doubt that that is not where this motion is coming from, so I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Sangster.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I just want to say in general, I think, you know, in life, you know, every action has a consequence, whether you're an adult or whether you're a child. And I do believe that even if you're a minor, you need to be held accountable for any action that violates a law. And to be honest with you, I think the leniency that is currently bestowed upon these kind of young offenders, I don't think we're doing anything to aid their personal growth. And we don't really serve justice for those affected by their kind of reckless actions. I do think we need to pursue a balance where young people are guided to understand the effects of their actions. And that then will promote their growth into kind of responsible adults, which I know Councillor Cogley kind of touched upon. And I do believe that I agree with Councillor McGregor. I don't think we should demonise these young people, and I think the majority are really hard-working and decent young people. But I think for those that are exhibiting these sort of behaviours, to not have consequences to their actions, I really don't think we're doing them any favours either. because we're not promoting them into being, you know, law-abiding adults later in life. So for that reason, I am absolutely going to support Councillor Cogley's motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sangsbury. Councillor David Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, listen to Councillor Cogley, Councillor McGregor and Councillor Sangster there, and to be honest, I find myself agreeing with a lot of what they said. I think politicians of all parties, because this started, I think, in the 1980s, and everybody's had a chance of being in power. Certainly in the UK, the Tories and Labour have been in Scotland, the SNP have been in, and all politicians have moved society. We've told society you need to move in a certain way. And I agree with everybody's saying that the antisocial behaviour is only a small minority of our young people, but it's a small minority that seems to be in the increase. And politicians need to think, okay, we've had 40 years of loosening the controls on young people, or inventing policies of light touch parenting, which God knows what that means. If I look back in my years of parenting 4 kids, if the laws of today were in place, I might have ended up in the jail, or social security might have been involved. Social services might have been involved. Social security. I did have to rely on social security once or twice. But no, social services might have had to get involved. For what? Because I gave a couple of my mains a wee tap in the bum now and again. ASBOs, we're talking about ASBOs being the answer, and that's the route to criminalisation, young people. Surely to goodness, if we're having to dish out ASBOs at 12, 13 and 14, if those kids had a wee check in their behaviour at 8 or 9, be that from a parent, from a police officer, from a teacher, it could be nipped in the bud far, far earlier. But we've told society we've got to have this light touch way of doing it, which is obviously having negative effects. Sally hit the nail on the head for me. I mean, I think every politician in this room looks at the rise of reform with absolute horror, because that's a far, far, far right political party. You scratch the surface of reform, nobody in this room will like what they see. But they're using this issue. They're using this issue with the general public to now have polling somewhere between 20 to 30% down south. That's a major, major worry. And I think every other political party needs to look at what the results of what we've actually brought in. And we need to not turn to the far right, but we need to turn back a wee bit to the right on this particular issue. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Thanks, Councillor Richardson. It's just as well I know you well enough to know that you're not condoning unjustifiable assault on a young person with a scalp in the bum.
I said a couple of weeks
outdated and not right. Next on my list, I've got Councillor McFadden.
I'd have to say that, you know, sadly, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far today. But my issue is, or the issue is, as far as I can see, there is no ultimate sanction. When I was unwell there a couple of years ago, I took to watching daytime television quite a lot, just because there was nothing else to do. But the number of programs you see about, you know, antisocial behaviour and what's happening, and you see the whole thing go through a few months. There was all sorts of programs like that. With these young people that are really causing the trouble, the ones that are, there's no way around it. They are criminals because they are really, really damaging to their own environment. They've got no respect for anything at all. Whether we criminalise them or not, they criminalise themselves. The issue is, if as a council we do employ all these powers and we put these underage ASBOs in place, which then means we have to have a, you know, an agreement that we will ultimately criminalise them when they don't stick to the conditions of the ASBOs, because when they don't stick to the conditions, they get criminalised, they go to court, they go wherever they go. There is no then sanction put on them. They're told to go away and behave, or given some order that they don't bother following. If you watch these programmes, they're back out in the street 2 days later doing exactly the same thing. And some of them, when you watch these programmes, they see the ASBO as a badge of honour. You know, I mean, ultimately, once we've put the young ASBO on and sadly criminalise some of them which deserve it, and maybe some of them it's a shame that happens, then the police get involved, then they get fully criminalised, becomes a criminal matter. There's nothing really happens to them. The courts actually don't do anything because they're not going to put them in jail. They've got no money to fine them. They don't care what the court says they've got to do or not do. They're back out doing the same thing, you know, straight away. And this was very evident watching these programs, you know, where they were going through the whole process of what happened and, you know, trying to sort the thing out. I think discipline has been diluted and consequences have been diluted slowly, as everyone says here, for the last 40 years. We've just walked headlong into this situation, and I think there's some real major changes where consequences actually have a value before you're going to get any of the intervening things, steps towards that to make any real difference.
David?
Just a couple of points that have been made, and I don't think anyone in the room, anybody would suggest or support any move to demonising all of our young people. Everybody gets those points that it isn't anything like all of our young people. It's a very small percentage of our young people, and we're not here to demonise anyone. The point of fact that I was simply making and make again, as Councillor McFadden has alluded to, if any authority wants to go down the route of underage ASBOs, it's that understanding of the process and the legal context. And the legal context is that if you breach that order of the court and you go out at night and breach its terms when you should be in the house, whatever the terms are that you breach, the breach of that is a criminal offence in its own right, and the way it could be dealt forward. And we're not going into sentencing powers, that's certainly not in our gift. But the bottom line is, yes, that is a criminal offence, and the appetite will need to be there to deal with that criminal offence, recognising that that young person's already behaved in a way that's been through a process, has already compounded that original behaviour by breaching the terms of the order. That isn't the same as saying we do an under 16 ASBO for every young person. It's not ruling them in or out other than in appropriate cases. And again, what I would suggest is that if the Willow Council, and I think it's implicit that we should be using all the powers, I think it's implicit in there that that's within law and within our powers, so as long as that's lawful and intra vires. And I think, again, the best way to address this clearly is to bring back the antisocial strategy that reflects the Willow Council today, which, subject to any other contributions in any vote that may yet go, is to accept that the starting point is we should not be ruling anything out. We should be using all the powers where appropriate and allow us to bring back that revised 2025 version of the antisocial behaviour strategy, and we can consult. The point was made, we can have consultations with leaders, we have sounding board arrangements, we can have discussions there to make sure the direction of travel is going to meet with Council's wishes and bring the strategy back, and that will hopefully reflect both the steer we get from you as Council today and meet your wishes, but if not, Council would have the final say when that strategy is brought back for your final approval. And if you want to make it go further, then we have that debate. Our job as officers is to give you our best advice on the pros and cons of certain matters and approaches, and give you clear advice on the potential implications, positive and negative, and then for you to make those informed decisions. I think if you're happy members, subject, as I said, to any other contribution, then if there's general agreement that we've never ruled any out, if there's general support for the view we never should rule them out and we should be given due consideration to using them where appropriate, then that's what we should bring back and reflect in the strategy, which will hopefully meet your expectations when we bring it back.
Thanks, David. I've got Councillor Jim Todd.
Thanks very much, Provost. As my old colleague John Campbell, past Deputy Provost, said, keep the ball on the carpet, folks, because we need to be very, very careful what we're asking about here. I fully accept the frustrations of people in our communities with what's happening. But if we implement, and I glanced over the Act for 2004 just last night, and there's things in there that will criminalise young folk. So I disagree with my colleagues on that, but young folk will be criminalised. Now, some of them might deserve it, but they will really be in the minority. And I think we've got the steps in place now to deal with those ones. It's really good that the chief social worker's here, because community justice is predicated on not criminalising young folk. And that's really important, because you criminalise a young person for a mistake or being in the wrong crowd at the wrong place at the wrong time, that person's that downward spiral into criminality. I think the steps we've got in place at the moment need to be given time for Blair's team and the antisocial behaviour team. I think the police need to play a bigger part, and every councillor here goes to the police and questions police and criticises for the right reasons. If the police are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, let's get them involved, get all the partners involved. That individual, that young individual that might have been causing a bit of a hassle somewhere, nobody here knows what that young individual's been through. Nobody knows if there's mental health issues. Nobody knows if there's been abuse in the past. That's what social work's here for, and they do a great job, because if somebody's referred to the panel, social workers get involved and they find out the background to that young person. And I find that, it's a bit worrying that people here are making decisions that will affect that young person who maybe needs help, to lead them away from the position they find themselves in, creating bother, chapping doors, throwing eggs at windows, maybe even more serious stuff. Now, if we take the whole act, and Councillor Cogley, I absolutely get where you're coming from, because things need to change. I would advise that we need to allow our antisocial behaviour team and our partners the time to bring that new model towards our communities. But if we take it into the full enforcement measures of the Act, I mean, I was riding my bike just a few years ago. We'd been at a funeral going back to my mates, and there was a hunt. I won't denigrate anything that these people are into, but there was a hunt. And these horses and the dogs and all the handlers all spilled out onto the road. And me and my mates had to do an emergency stop. Now, I would say that's a nuisance. I would say that's antisocial behaviour, because it's impacting on a law-abiding person going along the highway on their fully legal motorcycle. Nearly knocked one of my mates off with this big, beautiful 14, 15-hand horse. That's antisocial behaviour in my view. So I'd be asking the police to take action. So while the motion is for all the right reasons, I get that. We will criminalise young folk if we utilise any of these powers. I would far rather let antisocial behaviour, partners, social work, panel, everybody to deal with those individuals. And let's remember, it's 13% of all the antisocial behaviour interventions, 13% are young folk. Let's help them rather than criminalise them. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Right, I've got a list of people voting in, but I'll have Councillor Cogley, Deputy Leader. Then if you've indicated you want to speak, I will definitely get to you. Yep. So Councillor Cogley.
Thank you very much. And first of all, just thank you, Councillor Todd, for your comments. If we don't implement the Act, we're breaking the law. So it is mandatory that we do implement the Act. Now, Councillor Todd, you make a fair point in terms of certain individuals and their backgrounds, and we don't know what their experiences are. And as you have said, this is where social work comes in. It absolutely is where social work comes in. And we have to ensure that the young people that you're referring to are dealt with accordingly through the social work resource. But that isn't a reason for saying that there shouldn't be rules for everyone else. And the exceptional instances should not mean that the rules don't apply to the majority. And the Scottish Government has said that we need to implement this Act. And as elected members, we can't pick and choose. When we have a piece of legislation, we can't pick and choose which bits of it we implement because we like it and which bits we don't implement because it's a bit difficult. It's the Act, and it is our responsibility to implement it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Provost. Let me go back to the 50s, 60s, the 70s, the 80s, similar to the discussions we had during about campaigns and national campaigns. It existed, antisocial behaviour audit back in that time, whether it was children, and again, no trying to demonise children. We will, because the headlines in the paper after the back of this discussion will be about children. Not the 87%, but it's going to be about children. So we are demonising them as we sit here because that's where the focus of this discussion sits today. Yes, there should be consequences. I'm not saying the consequences are sitting currently, and what I'd be looking for that sits within the Act just now, I think, and Councillor Cogley picked up on the point, it could take time to have a look at that Act, but different consequences need to be looked at, and we cannot just in the back of a whim deliver restorative justice without going to court, because it doesn't exist yet. We can't do that. We need to go through that process before we can deliver legally restorative justice. There's things in there that need to be changed. There's things in there, I don't know whether because it's the Act, we need to implement absolutely everything in the Act. I might come to the question what we actually implement and what do we not do within the Act, and why do we not do that? Why do we not fully enforce that Act? I think through community justice and my term on community justice, I did really learn a lot about the backgrounds of younger people, how their mind evolves over years and how they finally become to maturity. We advocate in Scotland that we shouldn't put anyone in prison under the age of 25 because their brain's not fully matured. To do that with 12-year-olds and bring them into that system with Asmond, then if their parents don't comply, and by the way, we are parents as well, sitting in here, corporate parents and carers, then we could be held accountable as well for the actions, or the way it's described in the Act, reckless actions if parents know enforcing what that sits. So for me, there's lots in here that we should be really, really careful how we tread and go forward. To compare what's happening now with the right wing and governments running about antisocial behaviour, and we don't want to go down that tread. For me, it's two totally different things about no listening. We are listening. For me, there's options there still to listen to partners, and I'm aware of some of the issues that even the violence reduction unit were tackling down in Wallison and there, and how that has helped wider nationally. That I know Niven Rennie's been involved in. Wider issues as well down in England, that's extended in there, and it'd be interesting to see the work that's come back and the feedback on that work in Lancashire with the football clubs and Barnsley, I think it was FC down there, and bringing that back into Kilmarnock. We know that some of the stuff that we're doing on a Friday night to take our younger people off the streets and get them more involved. Dispersals, yeah, it's down to the police. The police can disperse one or two because you get a crowd of 20 or 30 young people, and it might seem, and again, it's subjective, are they intimidating? If there's one or two within that group that are intimidating, then the police, they have that. It's up to them to remove them from that group. I hung about in groups of 10 on a Friday night. We weren't antisocial. I didn't think we were antisocial. Subjective opinions might have said we were being antisocial because we were hanging about in a street corner on a Friday night. But I think we need to be very careful. I'll say that again where we go with this. I'm delighted to hear that members only want to criminalise children, but we need to be very careful because we're going down that road to do that. And bearing in mind what I said, their young minds are not fully formed until the age of 25. And another point that I need to go back to is, as far as educators go, the parent is the primary educator, and it's like when Councillor Boyd said we need to tackle children now because they're the parents of the future. It's like the chicken and egg scenario. Should it be the parents that we're looking towards before the children come? So I'll leave it sit there for now.
Thanks, Deputy Leader. Councillor Cogley, I'll bring you back in at the end if that's okay, because I have a massive list of people to get through and you could address many at the same time, perhaps. If you've indicated you want to speak, I do have you on the list, so I promise I'll get to you all. Deputy Provost.
Right, thanks, Provost, and sorry for annoying you there. I was desperate to see where I was to get to speak because of it actually taking that money notes. That I'm not sure what I'm going to say now, which reminds me of listening to the Deputy Leader, his lovely speech at the Baird Institute about the goal before and after, and he was referring to his notes and he couldn't read his writing. Well, I think I can maybe just about read my writing, but I'm not sure in what order I want to say something. I thought this motion would lead us to a good debate, and it so far has, and I certainly don't want to stop that. But we've talked about reform, and we've even talked about daytime TV. And when I go through the channels, I never watch much daytime TV, but when I do my usual scrolling through 400 channels and there's nothing on. But I never see any daytime TVs about tax evasion, where they folk that could pay and won't pay and would help or use services and different things and fund councils. You don't see money of them on. Anyway, just before a couple of things, I was at Hull Head Primary School the other day and we watched, along with a lot of other councillors, we watched The Masked Performer. And that shows you the other side of the talents of our kids, which was awful good. And again, officers have highlighted, it's not that we're not doing nothing, we are doing lots of things. And but to do something, we can't do it as just a council on our own. We need our partners, we need to have involved the police and etc, etc. And again, come back to, because I've heard the word children mentioned quite a few times in this, so we've got to be careful with our children. And when I think back to my time in corporate parenting, and then it went to Pizza and Co, I don't know if it's actually got another name now, but when we actually sit down and you're in the company of the young folk and you're listening to what they're actually saying to you, and you're listening to them when they say, how can I apply for that job? I haven't got a driving licence because I can't afford the lessons, etc, etc. And then we've put money by to try and get them the lessons and get them a driving licence. So I think to get to the question to me arising for the motion, which I'm fully supportive of, it says, and Councillor Cogley's repeated it, this East Ayrshire Council should actively promote and support the use of all enforcement measures contained in the Antisocial Behaviour, etc. Scotland Act 2004. And I totally accept that, but how do we do that? And I think we need to have a review. I think, as David Mitchell was quite rightly pointed out, and the head of social work kindly sent me through, I'd asked for some information, she kindly sent me through the working group's paper. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to read it because there is quite a few pages. But one of the recommendations, and I think David Mitchell pointed out, was recommendation 5. Responses to antisocial behaviour must include both prevention for sustainable change and policies to deal with situational factors to tackle immediate harms caused by antisocial behaviour. This will require more effective partnership working, co-commissioning organisations to work together differently, and the recommissioning of sustainable services like community and youth work, including community learning and development, youth work and community resilience efforts. Our recommendation is that all local authorities review and update their current antisocial behaviour strategy arrangements and strategies to ensure a dedicated focus and spend on the prevention and addressing of antisocial behaviour. Local authorities should publish a dedicated antisocial behaviour strategy as required by the Antisocial Behaviour, etc. Scotland Act 2004, rather than include antisocial behaviour within wider strategies such as community safety. So there's a recommendation that I think that we could clearly follow and give us time to put it all together and convey that to our community planning partners. And one of the other things I wanted to say as well is that some of our children don't have access to full-time education. As some of them are either self-excluded or formally excluded or in very minimal timetables. So I think, and Councillor Friel actually come up with a good proposal, assisted by myself, regarding spending some of our early intervention money on making sure we get our kids back to school in a proper way. And we actually went and talked to the Head Education and Julie Hope. So to me, there's a lot of things we can do, and that's what we should be building in as we go forward. And I hope we don't come down to a vote on the motion. I hope we accept the motion. But the question is, what do we do for here? And I think David Mitchell's kind of highlighted what we could do, and I would support that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. Leader.
I don't know if that's an amendment or no, but I would support the sense of where Deputy Provost is going. I think I totally agree with the sentiment and the intention behind the motion, but I do think we've got to take a holistic approach to this. I'm a wee bit like you, John. I've got notes all over the place with folks speaking and all the rest of it. But I think the important thing, and I think Jim referred to this and the other Jim, we've got to watch, what the public are taking out of this. And I know Kevin and other Jane saying, the last thing we want to do is demonise children, and I think we've got to make this absolutely critically clear. We're a council that celebrates kids. We've got a young people's cabinet we would be proud of. There's so much activity going on out there. With the Communities Minister for the UK doing last week, looking at centre stage and looking at Take a Bow, and I was absolutely proud to show what we're doing in East Ayrshire. So we're not complacent. We've known as a society and as an authority, we know more about trauma, we know about ACEs and adverse experience. And despite the political climate, the poverty situation that we've got out there, and through working with our partners, there's so much more we can do upstream, as I think David put it, to make folk don't go down the wrong way, because probably most of us down here at one time in their life have down the wrong path, but we've got to support through a community that gets us back in the straight and narrow. And that's what and somebody mentioned the kind of political situation just now about reform, and God knows I hate to mention them, and they'll give them one of more creams that they're already getting. But the one thing these people on the right, historically, the extreme right, have always picked in minorities and tried to kind of separate folk from the rest of society. We're, collectively 32 folk with 32 different views, and I believe in working together to get the best for our young people that we can, and I hope there's no division in the motion, and I hope that we can all get behind it and get a fuller review that takes something, that takes on board what the motion is that's coming from Sally Cogley, and also addresses some of the kind of holistic things that we're doing, some of the good things that we're hearing from Niven Ray that Jim mentioned, and others that are truly, as a local authority, they're very innovative right at the head of, other authorities. We're doing so much for kids that we need to give ourselves a wee pat in the back with it, instead of, just the way we're involved and the way we engage with young people. And I would say, we need to take that holistic approach, bring back a full review, including this, and look at all legal mechanisms for being tough and kind where we need to be. But I think, we're doing a lot. We know more about, I'm not going too much more, but as I said, we know more about trauma, and we're doing a lot of work about that, and adverse childhood experiences. There's some of the causes behind these, and let's get and work and engage with our young people and have that full-scale review. Thanks, Provost.
Okay. Okay, so just discussing with the legal officer, I think we're coming to a kind of consensus for going over quite a lot of similar things. I have a lot of yous down to speak, but is anybody got anything perhaps different's not the word to say? Is MD otherwise minded perhaps? Right, Councillor Boyd?
Real interesting speeches. I want to just clarify a few points that I made. Now, just in case there's any misinterpretation, I'm not demonising young people. The opposite. It's the society. It's got the problem here, not the young people. And for Blair's point, I really appreciate what Blair's work's doing. And I do need to mention this. Twice I've witnessed youth in the multi-storey. There's been youth pelting workers with multi-storey. That's why the project's delayed, or a big part of it. Twice I phoned the police. One time a Sunday afternoon, the police came. The youths were just laughing at them because they know nothing happens. But the police are seen as weak and powerless because they don't have the same powers. Now, I'm going to go back, and we're talking about working with youth, and Jim Todd's got good points about demonising kids. You know, I'm talking about persistent youths here. Now, I'm going to go back to my teaching. I taught for 28 years. I was just doing this. I reckon I've worked with about 4,000 or 5,000 young people with a range of abilities, a range of social backgrounds. So, and I'm going back to lack of boundaries. I've seen it since 1990, a gradual erosion. Now, I don't want the belt back. That's wrong. It'll never come back. But there's a gradual erosion of standards, and it's in the schools, in secondary schools. When I started teaching, nobody would dare swear at a teacher. Telling a teacher to F off now is quite common. If you did, you'd be excluded. Now, exclusion isn't always the answer. The pupil's back in front of the teacher. Some of the things, you guys don't see it. Ask secondary school teachers some of the things that's going on. Lessons disrupted for 20 minutes. And it's not always kids, you know, that have, you know, and that possible have issues like that. You know, others follow on, you know. We don't have these boundaries. And this is spilling out onto the street. And it's, as I say, there's a minority, but the other ones follow on. And I just see the lack of boundaries. Pupils and young people need boundaries. You can't do that. Like the multi-storey again, the rule is you don't go in there. You know, but again, nothing's happened to these just because I'm in and out all the time. And that's just an example there. So I will stop at that point.
Councillor Boyd, sorry, I've been trying, I mean, this is so important. Nobody's wanting to hog tie it up in procedural issues, but as a second of the motion, you get one speech of up to 5 minutes in support of the motion.
Okay.
You're on your second speech and you're also introducing new material.
Right.
I say again through you, Chair, in order to support you in your role as Chair, that if there is general support going forward, and point has been made that several points made. Firstly, this council has never ever taken a decision that it wouldn't use certain powers under the Act since 2004. So there's no policy to be reversed here in terms of that policy. And Councillor Todd made a point about councillors taking decisions today that affect individuals. No, the role of council is to set the strategy, and then the role of officers is to implement the strategy. It's officers that sit in those individual case conferences and make the decisions around about what's best for the individual young people and others. The bottom line would be if there is general consensus that we rule nothing in and nothing out, because we never have and we never would, lawfully and otherwise, and that we have a gap here that we need to refresh and revise and bring back the strategy, that strategy should then set out best recommendations to council about how we would use all of the powers and in what circumstances they would be appropriate to be used, taking our partners with us. So the answer to the question being asked today can only come back sensibly and logically and appropriately in the form of that revised strategy, and the debate can continue then. We will take a clear steer here, and you can be assured that the strategy will set out in the circumstances in which each power it would be appropriate to be utilised, whether it's in our gift, the Chief Constable's gift, or anyone else. So I say again that in terms of the discussion today, and it's your discussion, members, but if there is a clear emerging direction supported by all or the majority in the chamber, then from the Provost point of view, there is provision in the standing orders that while the Provost would never want to curtail debate, if matters have been debated, then there is that option to bring matters to an end. The Provost is aware others still wish to speak, but I think, without putting words in the Provost's mouth, it would be helpful if any further contributions are either raising anything that hasn't been discussed or particularly any opposition to what's been set out, which is a fairly anodyne way forward, which is we'll prepare a strategy and bring it back for your approval or otherwise.
No, that is fair, David. There's people still indicating that they do wish to speak, so I'll bring in Councillor Crawford.
Thanks, Provost. The debate went to children all of a sudden. Antisocial behaviour is not just with children, and they've got to learn. What about the ones that makes mistakes and they don't make any more because they've been dealt with? Right for wrong, they're needing to learn. Right for wrong. And it's a simple thing, and it should be done by parents.
Yeah. Councillor Ingram.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, so in regard to the motion itself, I think it's been mentioned a few times. Certainly, Mr. Mitchell mentioned applying it where appropriate. I don't know whether or not I could suggest an amendment to the wording and just add in where appropriate and in line with best practice. I know certainly officers, I imagine, would do that already, but I think that the danger with the way it's written at the moment is that you could read it and always apply the most punitive measure to any circumstance. So that making sure that the appropriateness and best practice is also in there. I also had a second point in regard to the language that we use when we're discussing these things is really important, because I know we have mentioned the fact that we do not want to demonise children or anyone else who might be needing that support to maybe bring them back into a more appropriate way of living. But certainly some of the language that we have used today has been quite offensive. Now, I don't know if that language was meant to be directed at certain groups or if it was trying to describe the concerning move to extremist politics. But I think we should all be mindful of the discourse and how we put that across. And yeah, just to echo some of the other members who have mentioned the fact it's a minority when we're talking about children, and in that subgroup, it's a minority of our children, some of whom really do need our support because of the underlying reasons for their behaviour. So those were my points. Thank you, Provost.
Prolong. I genuinely don't think, and with the amendment would be required. I make the point. Turning it round, this council would never ask its officers to come back with any proposals that weren't appropriate. I do take it as read, and I think that's absolutely understood by everybody. Everybody, I think, buys into the concept that a decision about underage ASBOs or dispersal orders isn't going to actually make them happen next week in its own right. In terms of the underage ASBOs, we'll bring back the strategy. In terms of dispersal orders, it's working with the police and identifying where it'd be more appropriate. Purely as examples, and to broaden it out, as you say, from underage. The bottom line is I think the general understanding is, and to rehearse so that the council is not ending up coming out of this in the wrong light, everybody, I think, has accepted throughout this debate that the vast majority of our children and young people do not act in this way. That's point number one. A very small number do. Of that small number, some of them go on and get involved, and it's a continuing course of behaviour, and some of them, as Councillor Crawford and others have pointed out, may dabble, may have an experience, and then may learn from that and may be diverted, whether their own means, by their parents, by other opportunities in society, to a different way of behaving. So we are all clear we're talking about a very small number of young people, but I think equally members also will reflect that that very small delineated group, without demonising the wider group and criminalising them. I'll leave it to others what they think that means. If somebody commits an offence and they're convicted for it, is that them criminalised? And if so, who criminalised them, as the point was made earlier? Is criminalising creating a situation that makes it more likely people will create the behaviour, or is it dealing and applying the sanction to behaviour that's already applied? So that's all part of the bigger piece. I say again that if the council is accepting that we should, in devising the strategy or revising the strategy and bringing it back, we absolutely have to have due regard to all the options and come back and set out. And that strategy will never set out, we're never going to do X or Y. It will set out the circumstances. They may be wide, they may be limited, but the point of the strategy would be to set out where, for instance, underage ASBOs, which we aren't doing at the moment, that's why we're talking about them, and where dispersal orders, which the police don't use, and that's why we can talk about them, where would they sit into that strategy, and where would they sit into our response to particular incidents in communities? It doesn't mean a decision in that strategy that we will use them where appropriate. It means we'd use them in every instance. I've talked about that escalation. If it's the first person's young person's first offence, then fine. If they're repeat offenders, the ASBO might be appropriate. The strategy will set out those limited circumstances where that minority who are repeating could be put through that process, but it will also set out the input and requirements of other partners for that to happen, and that's what we would bring forward in the detail, and members can then see that in the strategy. So I don't know that it will make much difference today, because any strategy would have addressed all of those powers and set out exactly that. So it's a question of, if that's where the general support lies, take the decision that we will bring back the strategy, and then that's where I really believe it's for the councillors to get into the detail and decide whether or not that strategy fully reflects your aspirations and ambitions, or whether you want to tell us to add to that or amend that in any way when we bring it back. I do think that's the way to proceed here and capture what I do believe is a consensus view, recognising there are so many aspects to this. We're in it, yet it's a minefield, and you just need to be careful that we take the time to pick our way through this so that we get to the best outcomes for our communities without upsetting too many of them while we get there.
I wholeheartedly agree, David. Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Ingram? Yeah, okay. Right, we'll bring this to a close. I'll bring in Councillor Watts, and then I'll ask Sally to sum up, and then we'll bring it to a close. Okay, Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Provost. I think we all across this chamber, we are all in the same mind that we understand that our communities are extremely concerned about antisocial behaviour across the piece. You know, I do have concerns about criminalising children, and we need to deal with it, that it is across not just children, it's across adults and antisocial behaviour as well. However, and this is probably something that is slightly different, I do have a concern with the way that the motion is written, because the way that it's written, it makes it sound as if, as a council, up to this point, we haven't been doing that. So I would suggest that we need to add in the words continue to after should actively. So in other words, this East Ayrshire Council should actively continue to promote and support. Because if we don't say that, it sounds that up until this point, we haven't been doing that. Now, I know, as everyone in this room will, that that's not the case. But I think it needs to reflect, in a way, in my mind, something that's actually accurate. Thank you, Chair.
Again, Provost, sorry, and again, with the greatest respect, the normal, sorry for being a lawyer, but the normal approach to interpreting things is to give them the simplest meaning. This is simply a statement, and I didn't draft it, so I'm not being defensive. It's simply a statement that the council should actively promote and support the use of all the enforcement measures contained in the Act. I don't believe it would add any value, and I think it might open up a whole different line of debate in terms of the past. Officers are comfortable. Blair has spoken in terms of our general approach with or without a current strategy to ASBOs in the round, and how we deal with our tenants, how we deal with warnings, how we deal with the general ASBOs for the adult community. The motion doesn't touch directly, doesn't actually mention, going back to Councillor Crawford's point, underage, but the discussion takes you to not what you are doing, but what we're not doing. And we've covered that. And what we're saying is if there are gaps, we will address them through the revised strategy and bring them back. And if we haven't closed all the gaps, you, council, will tell us as officers what further action or steps you would wish within that strategy, and then we'll go and implement the strategy. So I don't believe it's necessary. As officers, we're not taking that as an attack or a criticism of the work that's been done to date. You sometimes have to plant a flag. You sometimes have to set that policy ambition and aspiration. And I simply take this as council telling officers to going forward without any comment on where we've been in the past. As a lawyer, again, I'll finish with, we like evidence. And to me, what should be important and in all of your minds is the evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, that you're aware of from working and living in your communities, of the extent of the problem and the sources of the problems. We'll bring the strategy how we think we have a revised and refreshed approach to dealing with that. It won't rule out any of the measures, and we'll set out within the proper legal policy and statutory context how we would implement all of the measures going forward, and we will set that out as a strategy for council to put their hand to and say, yeah, go and do all of that and we're happy. And if you're not happy with that strategy, you will tell us how to improve upon it before we go to implement it. But I take it as read that this is simply looking forward. We all understand we can't go back in time. So I don't think it would add anything. And I think it might actually detract and send us in the wrong direction if we start making this a comparative exercise about where we've been and where we would wish to go. It's perfectly appropriate just to say, here's where we are and here's where we want to go, without looking over our shoulder. I would actually not recommend that, but it's up to you, Councillor Watts, it really is.
Yep, thanks, David. Councillor Watts, is that okay with you?
Yes, it's fine. I understand the answer, but I still think that to be honest, the way that it's written, it does make it look that up to this point we haven't been following, and I understand that isn't the case, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's fair. Thanks, Councillor Watts. And like, there's going to be a review comes back. We'll bring a piece because it'll go on again. But that's all for the right reasons. Councillor Cogley, do you want to take the opportunity to sum up and we'll come to a conclusion?
Yep, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for the debate. I think it's been really interesting. And the motion stands as it is. And I look forward to our revised strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cogley. Are we all happy to agree the motion? Perfect. That's great. Okay, we'll move on to the third and final motion. This is one. Is everybody okay then now? Yeah. We'll just go ahead and wrap this up. It's fine. Councillor Kyle, would you like to present your motion?
Thank you, Provost. Just to let you know, 75 years ago this year, on the 7th of September 1950, one of the worst mining disasters in Scotland occurred at Ayrshire Castle Colliery. That's only 21 miles from where we are sitting today. A sea of mud broke through the earth's crust and broke through into the number 5 heading, sealing off every exit from the mine. 13 members lost their lives and 116 men were saved in one of the greatest rescue operations in the history of British mining. They were all down to the bravery of the teams from the Mine Rescue Brigade. At that time, the Mine Rescue Brigade's headquarters, believe it or not, was in Kilmarnock. On that day, a shift of miners, healthy, fresh and fit, went on a cage that took them to the bottom of the pit. With their peace boxes and tokens, their lamps fixed to their heads, or caps, they did not know that day they would be walking right into a trap. They struck that fateful day by poison gas and sludge, confined to a small space that could only move above. They would not raise a finger. They were trapped that couldn't budge. The air was bad, the roof was low, down in the living tomb. Did they get hysterical, raise their voices and yell, bring down curses on that place that was their prison cell? No, they sat down and waited, said a prayer and sang a song, hoping that the rescue party wouldn't be too long. Their patience was rewarded, for the rescue work was great, and once again they saw their family standing by the gate. With anxious faces, tear-dimmed eyes, the women gathered round to greet their son and husbands who were lost and now were found. More tears were shed that happy day, and now they were tears of joy. A woman had her husband back, a mother kissed her boy. Their joy and happiness was incomplete, still missing were 13 others who failed to make it through. Their silence, heroes, yes, heroes, everyone, although unknown to some, they were fathers and sons who were lost. Let's say a prayer for all of them as they lie silent in their graves. Never forget those who died, so lonely and so brave. Everyone, it was underground and was sealed there waiting for the rescue teams. When they were talking about singing, everyone that didn't know this song, by the time after 3 days, they definitely knew it, and that was the Old Rugged Cross. One man should have been here today, but through illness, was the only survivor out of the 116. I've spoken to the Provost, and she has agreed that her and myself will go up and see Andrew McDickens. The reason he's not here today is just through illness. He's in his 90s, and he's got problems for the waist down. So if he'd been here today, in his words, he'd been running back and forward like a yo-yo. So we'll go up and make arrangements, and we'll go up and see him, if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kyle. God, it's like all the feels with that. That was very, very nicely written. And that's a good plan. I look forward to meeting the gentleman. The MDE got a seconder for your motion. Councillor Crawford.
Thanks, Provost. You've got to get a wee bit of history. We're not going to let this go. You'll be remembering your minds, and I know the colleagues will be fed up sitting today listening to motions. But it was a different culture, different time. I couldn't wait to get left the skill to get down the pit. Again, he's saying, but to get into that, that's the culture. Your uncles, your aunties, your uncles and your father, they're all there. It's important to us. You'll hear Jim McMahon saying he's always proud to be a miner. That's just born in you. That's the way you are. You depend on your workers, you are working way. And to me, that brings it onto your life. Hence, we're doing council jobs if we can. But anyway, I would support it. And the one thing I see is they're not putting their, nobody mentions it. Then the crust just broke open. The sewage was coming down. I wonder how that happened. It happened because we were too near the surface. Anyway, that's fine. That's part of the rigours of mining. But the thing that gets me is they did sit down and pray. Nobody sits down and prays, well, very few. Sit down and pray now. And the end I'm coming to is the real heroes are the ones that's left at home, the women, the wains. They're left. They've got nay. These ones are doing right for what they've done and how they've become heroes. The women get forgotten all about. There's still 13 widows and kids to be fed. And that's what we need to remember. Thank you. I'd back it.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Councillor William Lennox.
Thank you very much, Provost. Really, I'd been a former miner myself. I fully appreciate the sentiment associated with Councillor Kyle's motion of remembrance and wholeheartedly support it. Thank you, Provost.
Thanks, Councillor Lennox. Deputy Provost.
I've never been down a pit, and I don't think I would ever want to, but I've had to sit aside Billy Crawford for a number of years, so Kenny was a minor. I've listened to Jim McMahon talking about it often, and I must admit I was wondering why the motion was coming here in the middle of May when the disaster, wasn't it, to the 7th of September 1950, and the time allotted to us, maybe as a council, we could do something to remember the disaster, even a plaque or something. But I just want to put that forward on the date. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. And that's certainly something we can maybe discuss it with. Yeah, yeah, we'll take it to officers and we'll come back. Absolutely. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Jim, for bringing this to Council today. In the late 20th century, life expectancy of a miner was 53 years old. 25% of them would die before they were 34, swallowing coal dust, suffering from pneumoconiosis, and life expectancy about 12 to 13 years less than everybody else. Disaster after disaster through the pits, but this was a disaster, but it was the mine rescue teams and everybody in communities that gathered round to help. When I talk about disasters, going back to the turn of the last century, 4 miners a day, every day, were being killed. The biggest disaster in Wales were 440 men were taken out, men, let me add, and boys. We had an explosion that totally wiped families clean off the face of the earth. This was a remarkable achievement. It's been recognised and put into form of a film. But to be there on the day could only, for me, in my mind, just set back how each family would feel watching a hole the size that it was. Well, let me make this clear. Millions of tons of peat and sludge filling the tunnels that these men worked in. How there wasn't any more killed, I will never know to this day. As the men were trapped and the air grew thinner and the oxygen in that air became practically non-existent. Their lines of communication to the surface almost gone. They were left in despair. But through that despair, they had fight still in them, and with picks and only picks, no using only what, because we need to remember, the Knockshana Castle colliery at that time was really state-of-the-art colliery with the best machinery in the hub. But to escape because of gases, they had to use hand picks, their hands. And that was a fight for life that they had. At that time, they didn't know people were coming for another side in the coal. But eventually got word through that they were coming for an oil mine, where previously there'd been disasters in that pit too. And I'm just going to touch on another disaster again. 12 years before Knockshinnagh in the Bank Oil pit, there was men coming up the pit in mine cars, hutches. And the only safety mechanism they had for bar a steel rope to stop them falling back down a 1 in 3 incline or decline was what we called a metal joke. It was a bit of metal that hooked onto the back of the last car, and if anything happened, that would hit a sleeper and stop. However, when they were near the top, that failed, and these hutches ran to the bottom. There was 3 men killed instantly. This is just along the road to Knockshinnagh. The 4th one died in hospital that night. One of the people that was killed was a 14-year-old boy, had 3 weeks into his mining career. He went in as young because his dad was crippled in the pit 6 years before it, and he felt the need to go to work to feed his other sisters. I think there was 8 and brothers in the family. So that fight back to Knockshinnagh was there coming for the regions of the old bank pits. 3 days nearly before they got them up, with 100 and 16 we had 12 that was killed. I was talking to the granddad, the grandson of one of the miners that was killed in there. It was John Dale. John Dale in his other life and another job was part of the Salvation Army, and we know that on the way back home after helping out that day, there was another 2 victims for the Salvation Army. They'd been there to deliver their services, so on their way back home they lost another 2. I spoke recently at the Beard Institute as part of the National Galleries project, and they're opening the call before it and after it. As we celebrate last week, 80 years, Freedom in Europe, VE Day, also commemorate this coming September, the 75 years. And never to forget, and I'm going to make the link, the mining to World War time efforts. Because miners wanted to leave in their droves to go and fight for their country. And I'm going to quote, and as I said last week, I don't normally quote Churchill, but I'm going to quote him today. This was him addressing a delegation of coal owners in 1942. We shall not fail, and then someday when children ask, what did you do to win this inheritance for us and to make our names so respected among men? One will say, I was a fighter pilot. Another will say, I was a submarine service. Another, I marched with the 8th Army. A fourth will say, none of you could have lived without the convoys of merchant seamen. And you, as appointed to the miners, in your turn will say, with equal pride and equal right, we cut the coal. Cutting the coal was always going to be a treacherous, and always was a treacherous occupation for anybody. I'm not going to, again, as I've said previously in here, once you're a miner, you're always a miner. I sat here the day with the suit on, but underneath it, I'm still a miner. I've read the book, and I would ask one of that's worthy to get a look at the book. The book was written by Ian McMurdo. His father was in, and one of the people that was rescued. His mother still lives, and she was my school teacher, Mrs. McMurdo. She's now in a care home, but every memory that she has, she can read in that, and she's quoted in that book. It's a fantastic book, and I was in tears when I was reading the book because I could place myself in their position where the oxygen was going away, where the young men had to be calmed down, because remember the age of them, as young as 17 doing that mine at that time and younger. It was a heroic rescue for all the right reasons. Should it have ever happened in the first place, the disaster? Billy touched on it, it's questionable. The 4 men that were taken to court for it were admonished, but I think that was, and I think that's been described as kind of love-hate towards them because they were part of the big rescue. They designed the rescue for the pit heat. But it should never have happened in the first place, but it will go down in history and will be as one of the best and most miraculous recoveries of any life for that day Deb's doing. I sit here, Willie Lennox sits here, and Billy Crawford and Jim, as a dying breed, and I said this last week in the Beard Institute, because we are a dying breed. I'll probably be one of the youngest miners in the area. That's hard to say. But we sit here proud and really proud of the mines rescue teams, of which I was one of mine in the mines rescue. So really proud of the efforts that not just the mines rescue team, but everybody that was involved in the Ayrshire disaster, and that goes out to the wider communities, to the children and the mums, the grannies, the uncles that was all involved, that stood in the pit heat that day waiting on their loved ones going up. So once again, thank you for bringing this motion.
Beautiful. Thank you. Councillor Hogg online, and then I'll give it back to yourself, Councillor Kyle, to sum up. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you very much, Provost, and thank you very much, Councillor Kyle, colleague Councillor Kyle, for bringing this forward. As the daughter of a miner, the sister of a miner, and also both of then were involved in Mine Rescue of the Year. It's very important that we keep the memory of all those who gave for so much to us, pertinent and to the front forefront of our minds. I remember many stories my father recounted of mine rescues carrying limbs from men who lost them in bits of machinery down pits, and harrowing stories they were. So thank you, Councillor Kyle, for bringing this motion forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. If there's nobody else, Councillor Kyle, do you wish to sum up or?
I served my time as an apprentice engineer in Ayrshire. I know underground, as some folk know Glasgow. A lot of the men were still, when I was serving my time, a lot of the men were still underground working. They always worked for each other. They always helped each other. If somebody was finished and the other neighbour next to them was still a bit to go, they would get in and muck about as well. The bosses are the same. Everybody worked through one another. You had different types of mining. You had what they call stooping room. It's like a chessboard. The white pieces were the squares they cut out. The black pieces was just coal. It was holding up the roof. You had the long wall, which was cut at the bottom with a big machine. Then you had the power loading. You had the Dosco, which was a mini machine. It cut out the tunnel going through the channels. It was massive. It only took 2 men to work it. The rest was all done by automation. Serving my time, I spoke to a lot of these men, as I say, and there were quite a lot of comedians. One of the oldest that come up in Ayrshire, or come up bank number 7, they asked him what he would like, and his first words was, "Oh, I could murder a wee full-strength captain." That was after 3 days down the pit, trapped. Other ones would come up the pit and say, "Your wife's over there. Oh, I hope she's brought a couple of cans with her. I'm not thirsty." It was an honour and a privilege to work with these men. I was also in the mine rescue team. At that time, it wasn't Jim would be likely be working with liquid oxygen. I was strapped to his back. I was working with what they call proton. It was 32 pounds in weight strapped to your back with a big leather bag at the front. Now, you'd only 2 hours of oxygen in that bag. So when you're down a mine and it was full of gas, there were 5 to a team. One was the captain. His priority was looking after the 4 men in his team. He carried what they called the Davy lamp, which tested for gas. The flame in it changed colours. He also carried a canary. Now, the canary had its own wee box with its own wee oxygen in it. If the canary fell to the ground, that was gas. It could smell gas before a human being could do. So they shut the glass door and gave it a dose of oxygen up at Perth. When they discovered that, they moved back, testing all the time till they got to a fresh air base. Now, if the fresh air base was a quarter of an hour away from where the disaster was, that was a quarter of an hour to get back out. So that was them losing half an hour of working time. That's the way there's many mine rescue teams. After 4 hours working, climbing over, you had to stay in the surface for 24 hours. If you were sent back down, you were only allowed down for an hour. Then you had to be off for 24 hours to save you getting the bends. So that's the way you had as many mine rescue teams. They brought them from all over, and it was no problem. They didn't need to volunteer. As soon as they had their bell going, they headed straight for the vans to take them to wherever that was. That's the life of the mine rescue and miners. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Kyle. So we're all happy to agree this motion. Okay, that's quite a note to end on. Oh my gosh, thank you everybody. We'll just I don't know if members know that one of our colleagues, Councillor Beverly Clark's husband passed, and it's just to pass our condolences. Thank you, members, and the meeting will now come to a conclusion.